Hello, Internet. This is Matthew, and welcome to the Philosopher's Guide to the Apocalypse. This is not, as you might suppose, a podcast about surviving the zombie apocalypse. At that point, all hope is lost, and you should run into the horde of zombies. No, this is a podcast in which a variety of subjects will be examined using philosophy in the hopes of gaining greater insight and perspective. This podcast won't solve all your problems, but it will make you think. Your mileage may vary. Normies not allowed. Okay, then. Thank you for tuning in to the fifth episode of this podcast. Today, we're going to talk about a topic I enjoy talking about a lot, decadence. And we will be using a opinion piece that was published in the New York Times in 2020, February 7th of 2020 to be exact, by a man named Ross Douthat. I'm sure I'm mispronouncing his name. Douthat. And he wrote an opinion piece titled "The Age of Decadence." I'd actually like to read. I'll be reading a little bit of it here and there throughout, but I'd like to start with the first two paragraphs. Everyone knows that we live in a time of constant acceleration, of vertiginous change, of transformation or looming disaster everywhere you look. Partisans are girding for civil war, robots are coming for our jobs, and the news feels like a multi-car pileup every time you fire up Twitter. Our pessimists see crisis everywhere. Our optimists insist that we're just anxious because the world is changing faster than our primitive ape brains can process. But what if the feeling of acceleration is an illusion, conjured by our expectations of perpetual progress and exaggerated by the distorting filter of the internet? What if we, or at least we in the developed world, in America and Europe and the Pacific Rim, really inhabit an era in which the repetition is more the norm than invention, in which stalemate rather than revolution stamp our politics, in which sclerosis afflicts public institutions and private life alike, in which new developments in science, new exploratory projects, consistently underdeliver? What if the meltdown at the Iowa caucus, an antique system undone by pseudo-innovation and incompetence, was much more emblematic of our age than any great catastrophe or breakthrough? Okay, so that gives you a general idea of the tone of the piece and the thesis that the author is trying to put forward. He goes on to give a definition of decadence, which he takes from the late historian Jacques Barzon. He actually wrote a book titled From Dawn to Decadence, I believe. It was like his masterpiece that he published in his 90s. But decadence refers to, quote, economic stagnation, institutional decay, and cultural and intellectual exhaustion at a high level of material prosperity and technological development. So this is important because people kind of get confused by what decadence means. So when you think about decadence, I think what comes to your mind would be an extreme form of hedonism, total apathy about the world, or no desire or hope to change the world. Just an overall a violent time, perhaps. a time of a lot of maybe change, but in a negative direction. Change, it's like makes the situation worse. Sort of like an apocalyptic, cataclysmic situation. But that's not necessarily what decadence. That's not necessarily how decadence presents itself. Decadence can present itself in a wealthy empire or a wealthy country. But it is accompanied by the wealth is accompanied by as the author was saying, a lack of innovation, a rigidity in politics, art, science, and so forth. He gives a couple examples, actually. He gives the example of, can I find his name? Billy McFarland, who was the person who was responsible for the Fire Festival, FYRE, which was a total fraud. It was meant to attract like Instagram influencers and whatnot, but I think they put all their carts before their horse from what I read. So they didn't actually get the necessary permissions, and so they ended up giving these influencers a cheap version of what they were promised, and the guy ended up in jail, I think. I think he's still in jail, actually. The author also brings up Elizabeth Holmes, who founded the company Theranos, which was meant to create something called the Edison box, which was supposed to revolutionize blood testing, a device which could look for all kinds of diseases using a drop of blood. The device was never, they never got the device to work, and so all the money that was funneled into it ended up being used to combat whistleblowers. And then the last story, which was a surprise to me. I think actually someone had mentioned it before, but I totally forgot it, and it still like boggles my mind. I'm relatively ignorant about economic matters. That's a subject I need to study more. But it's Uber. The company which was an attempt to revolutionize the taxi and limousine market. But it actually is not very profitable at all. You would think it would be profitable. I mean, I use Uber all the time. I'm a constant passenger for Uber drivers. But in one quarter, for example, it lost $5 billion. And then let's see, let me read another quote here. After 10 years of growth, it has smashed the old business model of its industry, weakened legacy competitors, and created value for consumers, but it has done all this during using the awesome power of free money, building a company that would collapse into bankruptcy if that money were withdrawn. And it has solved none of the problems keeping it from profitability. The technology it used isn't proprietary or complex. Its rival in disruption controls 30% of the market. The legacy players are still very much alive, and all of its paths to reduce its losses, changing higher prices, paying its workers less, would destroy the advantages that it has built. And that's not a fraud. There's no fraud going on there. It's just a business model which sort of ended up undermining itself by its own innovations. So the author kind of looks at that and looks at those three examples and says that those are that is like typical of business nowadays. Now again, it's not as if decadence it has to that a country or an empire has to be impoverished to be decadent. But it is that, and I'm repeating myself at this point, I think, but it is that lack of innovation. So he also says here, quote, but slowly compounding growth, it's not the same as dynamism. American entrepreneurship has been declining since the 1970s. Early in the Jimmy Carter presidency, 17% of all United States businesses have been founded in the previous year. At the start of Barack Obama's second term, that rate was about 10%. In the late 1980s, about half of the United States companies were young, meaning less than 5 years old. By the Great Recession, that share was down to only 39%, and the share of old firms founded more than 15 years ago rose from 22% to 34% over a similar period. And those companies increasingly sit on cash or pass it back to shareholders rather than investing it in new enterprises. And I guess to put it in a sort of funny way, they quote where is it? They quote the venture capitalist Peter Thiel as saying, "We wanted flying cars, instead we got 140 characters." So in other words, people were expecting all this technological innovation. They were expecting like 2021 to be such a different world than it is now. A world which like it was just so far advanced than the world that many people grew up in. Sort of the Jetson type scenario. And now, of course, people look at that and they're like, "Oh, what a, you guys are a bunch of buffoons. Like, you actually thought you were gonna get like flying cars. You actually thought you were gonna live in a Jetsons episode. Like, what a fool you were." But I don't know if it's fair to say that about people, because for a good bit of the 20th century, there was massive innovation. I mean, I don't think one can discount the innovation that the internet was. Now, the author says that the internet doesn't, and all the other minor innovations like that don't really compare to airplanes or trains. We've not had a really like huge change in the way we live our lives by comparison. What we've gotten is an increase in depression and ADHD among the young, and the increase in there's an increase in marijuana use, which is according to which is associated with quote being comfortably numb experiencing stagnation as a chill good time. And then, of course, there's also been a decline in the birth rates, which generally has been a good thing for innovation and a good thing for the economies, because well, I suppose the simple reason is fewer people are competing with you for jobs. But according to the author, once we crossed over into permanent below replacement territory, the birth dearth began undercutting the very forces, youth, risk-taking dynamism, necessary for continued growth, meaning that any further gains to individual welfare are coming at the future's expense. Then the author goes on to say that Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders are symptoms of this decadence. They're both attempts at people to shake this off and aim for a new utopia. And both of them are critical of at least in rhetoric. In Trump's case, it's almost purely in rhetoric. But both of them, you could say, were critical of the Reaganite revolution, the Reaganite consensus that has been built up over the past few decades. Actually, I think this author, he seems to be like lumping in Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump and saying, like, this is bad, like these are bad signs. Both populism and socialism, he writes, Trump and Bernie Sanders represent expressions of discontent with decadence, rebellions against technocratic management of stagnation that defined the Obama era. And I'll just read a little more. I'm not trying to. You should read the article yourself, but I'm not trying to just rip off this guy's article or anything. A few more paragraphs down, he goes, but our battle mostly still reflects what Barzon called the deadlock of our time, the Kavanaugh affair replaying the Clarence Thomas hearings, the debate over political correctness cycling us backwards to fights that were fresh and new in the 1970s and 80s. The hysteria with which we're experiencing them may represent nothing more than a way that a decadent society manages its political passions by encouraging people to play act extremism, to reenact the 1930s or 1968 on social media, to approach radical politics as a sport, a hobby, a kick to the body chemistry that doesn't put anything in their relatively comfortable late modern lives at risk. And he also wants to make clear that he doesn't think society has really gotten worse, like materially, like violence has gone down, things like taking pregnancies and drunk driving have gone down. That there's less like direct action, in other words, among people of these extremes. The direct action that does exist is not the mean, it's the exception. He mentions that in the 1970s, quote, there were more than 2,500 bombings across the continental United States in one 18-month period. So he doesn't want to leave the reader with the impression that he thinks we are in an apocalyptic time. He thinks that the tragedy, I guess, is the rigidity with which we face. I'll read you a little more. If you want to feel as if Western society is convulsing, there's an app for that, unconvincing simulation waiting. But in the real world, it's possible that Western society is leaning back in an easy chair, hooked up to a drip of something soothing, playing and replaying an ideological greatest hits tape from its wild and crazy youth, which is, to be clear, hardly the worst fate imaginable. Complaining about decadence is a luxury good, a feature of societies where the mail is delivered, the crime rate is relatively low, and there's plenty of entertainment at your fingertips. Human beings can still live vigorously amid a general stagnation, be fruitful among sterility, be creative amid repetition, and the decadent society, unlike the full dystopia, allows those signs of contradictions to exist, which means that it's always possible to imagine and work towards renewal and recession. Now, I would have been outraged if he had stopped with that paragraph, but thankfully, to his credit, shocking to give credit to the New York Times, right? He goes on. I'll read one more paragraph, I promise. He says, so you can even build a case for decadence, not as a falling off or disappointing end, but as a healthy balance between the misery and poverty and the dangers of growth for growth's sake. A sustainable decadence, if you will, in which the crucial task for 21st century humanity would be making the most of a prosperous stagnation, learning to temper our expectations and live within limits, making sure existing resources are distributed more justly, using education to lift people into the sunlit uplands of the creative class, and doing everything we can to help poorer countries transition successfully into our current position, not because meliorism can cure every ill, but because the more revolutionary alternatives are too dangerous, and a simple greatest good for the greatest number calculus requires that we just keep the existing system running and give up more ambitious dreams. Which that he says that argument carries you only so far. Actually, I lied. I have to read you. I thought that was the last paragraph. I have to read you a little more. How dare I lie to you, right? Anyway, he concludes with, so decadence must be critiqued and resisted, not by fantasies of ennobling world wars, not by Tyler Durden from Fight Club planning to blow every IKEA living room sky high, but by the hope that where there's stability, there also might eventually be renewal, that decadence need not give way to collapse to be escaped, that the Renaissance can happen without the misery of an intervening dark age. So there's a lot. I just threw at you. I wanted to use that article as a springboard for this conversation because it was very interesting to me. It was, I mean, pretty much every time I read the New York Times, I'm not really surprised. Like I kind of know in my mind, okay, this is what a New York Times article is like. If you ask me, okay, write an article that would appear in the New York Times, I could give you something, a pretty convincing parody. So this article does not really surprise me at all. At some level, I'm almost less willing to give the author credit, which this might not be fair, by the way, but when he adds the few paragraphs about, oh, we got to hope, we got to fight against decadence, I'm almost suspecting that was like not necessarily something he believed in, but something he just had to insert because people would have been outraged if he had ended his article with, well, we can't really hope for anything better, so got to suck it up. But I don't mean to read into his motives. That's not really I'm not so much reading into his motives as I'm reading into the motives of the New York Times, because they do sort of stand for that status quo. You know, we gotta work in the system. You can't go too radical. It's the mainstream establishment viewpoint. The polite dinner party conversation topics that you might hear certain commentators in the intelligentsia discuss. So at some level, like I feel, or I'm like frustrated because I feel like to talk about decadence is a fundamentally conservative act. I feel like it is, it sort of signals to the world like, okay, there was like a time when you thought things were pretty great, not perfect maybe, but pretty great, and now everything's going downhill, and you're watching everything go downhill, remembering the time when things were going well, or at least you thought they were going well. In other words, it's like such a cliche thing to say at this point. Like I feel like everybody's talking about, oh, this is a decadent age. We're in cultural decline. Nothing makes sense anymore. And yeah, I don't really. I'm suspicious when I am touting an opinion that is the consensus opinion, because the consensus opinion, since it is consensus, should be the one that's questioned. I mean, you question all opinions, of course, but I think it's particularly important to question the consensus because it's so easy to accept the consensus uncritically. But having said that, I have to say, if the New York Times is saying that we're decadent, then the New York Times is right. I was born in 1999, and it's taken me about, how old am I? 21. It's taken me about 21 years to fully absorb all of this, but I do get the sense that I was born in a time of cultural decline. I was born in a time when a lot of the old ideas have been dispensed with. Some old ideas that were bad, some old ideas that were good. So I was born in a new world, in the emerging. I was born when a new world was emerging. Because of course, when I was like in elementary school was when the first Apple products, for example, were coming out. So it was the beginning of the age of the internet, I suppose. And I also think it's important to not romanticize the past. So you don't want to, like, it's easy for me, since I wasn't alive in the say the 60s, to look back on that time and say, oh, that was a great time. If only I'd been alive in the 60s, everything would have been great. Well, no, actually, the 60s were an extremely tumultuous time, more so than ours, in fact. But what I think this author does get right is when he says that we're sort of this is a sort of feeble imitation of the culture wars and the ideological wars that were being fought in the 60s and 70s. And if I were to distinguish this time from then, I would say that back then there was more direct action. There were people out in the streets more protesting, attempting to fundamentally alter the world, as well as the establishment attempting to retain its power and influence. Whereas now, I mean, there's something similar. I think a friend of mine was saying, what, over like every 30 years or so, there's kind of a counterculture reaction to something, reaction to the established culture. But it's really a very feeble reaction. It's really a reaction which is not meant to change anything fundamentally. And this is why I think people get the culture war stuff and political correctness all wrong. Because what I hear from a lot of people, particularly the boomer con types, is really a fear that, well, like, no, like this PC stuff, it's like it is the new like Maoist cultural revolution. Like the world is going to be a horrible place soon, or it could be, because these crazy radical leftists are poisoning our culture, and we have to fight them to preserve the good that is within our culture. And I think that's only true from a very superficial angle. Because even there, I don't really see, it's not changing the power structure in any way. It's not really a revolution in any meaningful sense of the word. I mean, at the most, I guess, like worst case scenario, maybe, you would just see a change in social norms. So, for example, I mean, many people now don't say boyfriend, girlfriend, or husband, wife. They say partner. So maybe, 20 years from now, everyone's basically is going to say partner. I don't know. That's even the worst. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. I'm not even sure it's going to go that far. I'm not even sure there's going to be a major shift in social norms because of PC culture or whatever. But that's sort of, I guess, the fact that culture war stuff is so important to so many people is the sign, I think, of the decadence that is going on. So instead of putting money where your mouth is, instead of going to protests, instead of advocating for a lot of policies, people are complaining about whether Simone Biles is a hero for not performing in the Olympics because she was having mental health issues. Like that's a that's just a topic which I really think is so lacking in importance as to sort of be a little absurd. I mean, if you put a gun to my head, you have to, I have to give an opinion. I'll say I respect her for making her decision. She didn't feel like she was able to do it, so she didn't. Okay, I respect that. That's fine. Yeah. I mean, I get. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I have to pick a side, it's like, okay, I think the left is a little more correct on this than the right. Because what I hear the right saying is, oh, the left's calling her a hero. They shouldn't do that, because that's not what heroes are. And I'm like, I mean, I guess I'm not that interested in how we're defining hero here. It's like, yeah, I mean, I respect her because she stood up for she took care of herself in a moment of need. Like, okay, that's good. More people should do that. And she had a lot of pressure on her being an Olympic athlete. So I'm sure it was not something she was willing to do lightly. So I'm sure she didn't just wake up one day I'm going to quit the Olympics and, for no reason whatsoever. I'm going to let down all these people for no reason whatsoever. I assume there was a long sort of process of coming to that decision. So yeah, I respect her for that. But am I going to spend a lot of time talking about it? No. I mean, ultimately, I don't care about. I'm just not interested in sports, so that's me. That's my own bias, but that's just an example of something which people are taking to be so important and so newsworthy. They'll go on long rants about it. And I don't get why. I mean, I get why. I'm just very frustrated with that why. I mean, that why is, as we've been saying, people feel stuck. People feel hopeless. People feel like they can't do anything. So what do? They rant on Twitter. Their direct action kind of seems pointless. Mr. Lobster Man is saying, clean your room, stop trying to change the world. You can't even change yourself. So people are like, oh, can't change the world, can't change because I can't change myself. So no change, no revolution, no a fundamental restructuring of politics. And I feel this. I feel people's pain. I mean, I feel in a similar situation. Because I haven't done any direct action. I haven't done anything to change the power structure. I haven't put my money where my mouth is. So I'm as guilty of this as anyone else. I'm not sitting on my high horse saying I stepped up to the plate. Everyone else should too. What I'm saying is nobody's stepping up to the plate, including me. Now that's something I hope to change in the near future. I hope to step up to the plate more, and I hope to be able to find causes to fight for. But I think something else about a decadent time period is that fundamental pessimism that's going on. Well, I mean, to go back to the article again, it's like, well, there's two, I guess, strains. There's the optimists that are saying, well, if anything's going to work out, we just have to kind of wait it out and do good things. And the pessimists are like, well, we're heading towards total disaster. Evil's going to win. And I don't think, well, I mean, am I an optimist or a pessimist? And I remember, I think Michael Malice asked Douglas Murray that question, and I think he responded with, "What day?" So I guess I could give a similar response. I suppose I'm not pessimistic in the sense that I don't think change can be made. I don't think we are stuck where we are. I don't think our issues are impossible to solve, or the system is fundamentally, or the political system, say in the U.S., can't be reformed. But I guess the question sort of is, how do you come up with a plan? Like, if you don't like how things are, well, what do you want to replace it with? If you don't like the path we're going down, what path do you want to go down? And that might be where some of my pessimism comes in, because I don't really have a clear path that I want to go down. I don't really know the tools that are at my disposal, and I don't really know how to go about using those tools. But ultimately, all that goes back to, well, what do you want? What are your ideas? Like, what's your philosophy? What's your ideology? What's your worldview? What are your values? And so, to go back to Jacques Barzon for a second, he thought that a decadent age was opposed to, or the opposite of a classical age. And a classical age, he said, was one where everybody agreed on the questions you have to ask. You just disagree about the answers. In a decadent age, people don't even agree about the questions. Now, that's not a scientific way to categorize history, and it's a little simplistic, I admit. But I think there is some truth in that. People aren't really not only do people feel sort of stuck and are noticing how the system and not only are people stuck and noticing that our institutions are sort of frozen in time, people are very polarized, I guess. I'm not even sure that's the best way of putting it, though. People are, I guess, becoming more and more stuck in their own bubbles. Now, I mean, to some extent, I suppose you're always stuck in a bubble, right? I mean, you only know yourself. You only know what you experience. And what I experience is always different from what anybody else experiences. Even if I had a twin, my twin's experience would be a thousand times separated from my experience, because I'm not him, I'm me. And he's not me, he's him. And again, I mean, there's always disagreement within any time period. That's expected. That's natural. There's no getting away from that. And as I said on a previous episode of BTT. I actually think polarization can be a good thing, because that's when values clash, and that's when you're most able to fight for your values and attempt to win the battle of ideas, or win the ideological battle, or the battle for power or influence or whatnot. But even so, I'm noticing the increasing inability to talk to people. You sort of have to retrain your brain to figure out what kind of person you're talking to, their sort of their sources of information, their worldview, and only then are you able to have any kind of exchange. But so, I mean, and I've kind of asked myself, well, how polarized are people actually? Do people just seem more polarized than they actually are? Or is polarization an actual phenomenon, a real phenomenon that's increasing to detrimental effects? And I don't know, I suppose I'm this might be cheating a little bit, but I sort of try to play it from both sides. I mean, I think there is a lot of polarization, but there's still an ability to what's the phrase? Build coalitions. There's still the ability to have a united front, even with people you might disagree with. It's not a war of all against all. And I don't expect to come out on top all the time. I don't expect to have all the answers. I don't expect to have every opinion I have implemented in as policy. I'm not here to tell you I can create a utopia. In fact, I know I can't. But I don't see much desire to build coalitions, to have a united front. I see more of of uncompromising attitudes. So, I mean, I guess an example that comes to my mind is the all the COVID stuff, and the wide range of information that you can come across about COVID on the internet. Now, I mean, I'm not gonna to sit here and say, oh, we should all just come together because science. We should all just come together because medicine's objective and therefore medicine. Don't disagree, medicine. No, I mean, medicine, healthcare, these things are divisive. So that would be an incorrect attitude. That would be a fanciful position. But I bring it up because it's sort of interesting, because you sort of have two groups of people. You have the people that trust the institutions, and you have the people that don't trust the institutions. You have the people that think Anthony Fauci is doing as good of a job as he can be, or that there are people. You have the people who think Anthony Fauci is doing a a good job, or at least doing his best. And you have people who think of Anthony Fauci as a disreputable technocrat whose only interest is covering its own behind. Or you either think that masks help decrease the spread of the virus, or you think that they're superfluous. You either think that lockdowns were necessary, or you think the costs of the lockdowns outweigh the benefits. I mean, I could go on and on here. And so again, just to be clear, I'm not saying like, we should all can't we all just get along, kumbaya, yada yada yada. But the COVID is an illustration of those two sort of worldviews coming head to head. Do you fundamentally trust the institutions, trust the technocrats, trust the politicians, or are you fundamentally suspicious of them? Do you think they are at best incompetent, at worst malicious? Do you see them as like trying to take away your freedoms, or do you see them as protecting your freedoms? So, I mean, I guess at that level, I'm like, I think that's a battle worth fighting. I think that's a question we need to answer. And I just find myself in a funny position regarding that question, because I think I began my political journey with a more technocratic viewpoint, or at least being more sympathetic to the technocrats, and being more of a partisan for at least the technocrats that had a D behind their name. And so when the first wave of the virus came along, I didn't really think of it as a political issue. And I kind of thought it was sort of silly to think of it as a political issue. And I was a supporter of the mask mandates, of the shutting down the economy, keeping people, sending people home from schools and making them work from home, and all that stuff. But it's not really even a right versus left question, just to be clear. I mean, I think more people, I know more people on the left are supportive of the institutions, and more people on the right are critical of the institutions. But I did see, overlap, some on both sides of the aisle, in other words. And I think I've become more critical of the institutions. I think I've become more inclined to distrust the technocrats and the politicians. So you're hearing about the Delta variant of the virus, and you're hearing that vaccinated people, the CDC is saying that vaccinated people might have to wear masks again. They're truly trying to get everybody, or almost everybody, everyone who would be able to get the vaccine without any harm to their health. The government's trying their hardest to get that. Biden, I think, wants to, I don't know how far this is going, but I guess he's trying to make it mandatory for all government employees to get the vaccine. And so I guess what I'm trying to get at is I don't know if in principle I'm like against these things. Maybe you can make a case. Maybe like I should be. But European countries, some of them are kind of they're a bit more strict about these things. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. But I do admit that the CDC, that Anthony Fauci and many people in power have been inconsistent with the information they're giving people. And I don't think it's just about the science advancing or the science changing over time. A little bit of it might be that, but I don't think you can say all of it is related to that. I mean, I remember when we first heard about the virus and things were beginning to shut down. I was on a plane and I didn't wear my mask because I had been told, or I thought that, oh, well, no, you shouldn't wear masks because then people are going to think you're sick. But then, of course, pretty immediately after that, they were like, no, everyone should be wearing masks. And also, I do think I've been vaccinated. I'm fully vaccinated. I'm healthy. I do think it's questionable whether people such as myself need to wear a mask again. The whole point, supposedly, of Biden trying to get so many people vaccinated was to take off the masks, was to go back to normal. The vaccines are working, right? Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The vaccines are working. Now it was approved for emergency use only. That's true, but they are working. The COVID deaths now are for people. It's like 99 point something are from the percentage of the population that has not gotten vaccinated. And I think the people who might have died, who did get vaccinated, they were already very, very old. Anyway, and even a small percentage of those people, I think, died from COVID-related complications. So it's like, was I wrong? Is this my admission of defeat? Is this me saying I was a fool, I was duped? I'm here to pronounce the error of my ways and to spread the truth. No, not really. I just think the circumstances have changed. I think back when many of the mandates were put into place, I think it was better to be safe than sorry. Now I think it's less necessary, and therefore it's harder for me to defend it. And also, I've just kind of become a little bit cynical about this. Even if I were completely gung-ho about the second round of regulations or mandates, I don't know if anyone's going to tolerate it at this point. People tolerated the first set of mandates, but probably only barely. And I just don't know if Americans are going to tolerate it a second time. People in this country are, for good or ill, just very, very inclined towards letting people take risks. Like, the government shouldn't be taking care of me. The government shouldn't be taking care of other people. Life is risky inherently, and we just have to accept that. And that your risks are your responsibility. Now, there are people who believe that in other countries as well, but like there have been some protests in France about certain restrictions, but I think that's the minority. I think more people in various other countries, particularly in Europe, are more inclined to accept the stuff from the government with a little less fuss. But yeah, I mean, this is the world we live in. One where many of these fundamental questions are being sort of tackled. I think they're being tackled very badly. I think they're being tackled, again, mostly from the culture war angle, which isn't really helpful in the long run. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, I guess if you believe a statue of Robert E. Lee should or should not be taken down, yeah, I guess that's a manifestation of a larger disagreement. But I mean, I guess I'm kind of a lefty, and I don't really care. Does that mean I'm less of a lefty? Like, I don't think so. What about the lefties that I saw on Twitter criticizing the government's making a big deal about certain people not getting vaccinated? Are those lefties not real lefties? Like, no, not really. I mean, I think well, what I mean is I don't think it's fair to say that they're not real lefties. But yeah, so I think unfortunately we are facing a good deal of decadence. What to do about it? Not really sure. I mean, I guess all you can do is just kind of fight for your values, fight for your truth, and see where it takes you, see what you can accomplish. I'm not one to say we should just give up because fate will either take over or we're destined to have an inevitable like collapse. I expect my life to be relatively pleasant, materially speaking. I think even people, even the children of my generation, even the children of millennials and children of Gen Zers, I expect they'll also have a fairly pleasant life, although maybe a bit less than our standards. I mean, my standard of living is less than my parents, so it could also be the same for people who younger than myself and people yet to be born. But still, I mean, I think you got to try. I think you got to do something. I think you got to throw your hat in the ring, put your voice out there, make the world a more pleasant place for yourself and your fellow creatures, and non-human animals as well. I don't want to forget them. I don't know. I guess one reason I do this, I started this solo podcast, and one reason I do that other podcast, that's a couple of reasons. One of them is to kind of have more of a voice. I mean, I'm not going to sway any election. I'm not going to change any minds. I am insignificant in the grand scheme of things. But I sort of feel a little more comfortable knowing, like, well, I have a kind of space to talk these things out, think these things through, give my takes on certain things. And, you know, some people like to watch it and listen and are persuaded by something I said, or, you know, want to engage me about something I said. That's good. It's more than I can ask for. Then the other thing, I guess, is I am still in a stage where I'm trying to figure out what my values are, what my worldview is, what I believe in, what I'm willing to fight for. Maybe it's a better way of putting it. Because I don't know, I have this tendency to be able to see 1,010 points of view at once and have them all debating in my head at the same time. And that sort of can lead you, I guess, down a path of skepticism, which might be, which might prevent you from properly acting in the world. You know, you don't want to, you don't want to be so skeptical that you can't get out of bed in the morning. You don't want to be so skeptical that, at least I don't want to be so skeptical that I just withdraw into myself and am so skeptical of the concept of truth that I'm not willing to do anything or say anything or be anything. Because, like, well, can I be sure? I'm not sure I'm right. I could be wrong. The other person's probably right. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just a total buffoon. But everyone's a total buffoon. No one knows what they're talking about. Everyone's in the dark. We're all in Plato's cave. And I use that metaphor a lot. And, well, there's just nothing we can do. We're just stuck here. And unable to do anything because we're so ignorant, because truth is so beyond our grasp. But if I am a nihilist of sorts, which I think I probably am, I'm not a epistemic nihilist, or I don't believe in epistemological nihilism. I think something like truth is out there. I think I think I'm called, or my position would be called fabulism. I might be getting that term wrong, but basically it means someone who just thinks of truth as always uncertain, which, I mean, I think that's unquestionably true. Truth can be out there. You're just never fully sure that, you're just never fully sure that you're right. And you can't really ever be fully sure that you're right. You can be pretty sure. You can be fairly confident. Confident enough to act, say, or confident enough to make predictions, if you're talking about the natural sciences. But not so confident as to always 100% be sure that the opposition's view is totally wrong, and that you're totally right. That's just, I think, typical. That's like the intellectual humility, right? Which I think is important, because many intellectual people take themselves way too seriously. You know, if I didn't take myself way too seriously, I wouldn't be recording an hour-long podcast on decadence. But but I'm kind of ranting at this point. I just want to, I guess, get across to the audience that I am in I don't really have a worldview fully fleshed out yet. I'm still working through that in my head, still reading, still reflecting, still talking to people, still experiencing the world. And so I'm bound to contradict myself. I'm bound to go down rabbit holes and say foolish things. But because I am a decadent. Well, partly, I mean, mainly because I'm a human being, but also because I'm a decadent. And every path seems fraught with problems and seems untenable in its own way. But so does the status quo. So I don't know. I think I guess the way to fight decadence then, in conclusion, is to continue to search for the truth, to continue to struggle, and to have debates and discussions and go to protests or rallies or fight for causes you believe in, donate money to causes. Just keep on going, keep on living, keep on doing things. Not to be occupied and not to exist are the same thing for man, said Voltaire. It's not much. It's not glamorous, really. Doesn't really fulfill that like deep pit of nothingness in your soul to say, well, truth is elusive, and you just kind of have to keep on struggling for it with no real end in sight. And yeah, that's not like that's not really an answer I think people want to hear, but I think it's the answer they need to hear. If we want to get out of decadence, we just have to fight for it and to struggle continuously, and to pass on the struggle to other people and to get other people involved, and to be willing to struggle with other people, including our people we agree with, and including ourselves. I don't know. That's why I think nihilism can be very helpful. So, of course, the when you think of decadence, right? People think of nihilism, like, oh, nihilism, belief in nothing. What a horrible thing! Like, what a despicable belief to believe in nothing. You can't, or you might go so far as to say you can't believe in nothing. That's literally impossible. You're a human being. You have to believe in something to get out of bed in the morning. But I mean, that might be true to an extent. I do think, though, that a bit of nihilism never hurt anybody. A bit of nihilism just helps you to put yourself and other people and the world into perspective. It helps you be less dogmatic. It helps you be a little more humble. It helps you be more down to earth, and willing to change your points of view. Although maybe I don't know if I'm getting skepticism and nihilism a little, if I'm like kind of meshing them together in an unhelpful or inaccurate way. Actually, I think they do kind of come together, really, if you think about it. Because if you have in the back of your mind both of the idea that, well, I could be wrong, and both the idea that, well, nothing really matters, I think both of those can inspire you to act when you need to act, and to stop acting when you need to stop acting, and reflect more. Honestly, I think it's not nihilists that have caused the most damage to the world. It's dogmatists. It's people who believed in something wholeheartedly without really questioning themselves or questioning their belief system. So, same with skeptics. Skeptics, if they really harmed the world, people who are like questioning ultimate knowledge or questioning how we know things and kind of saying, well, we don't really know anything entirely certainly, we're all kind of just guesstimating. I don't really think nihilists or skeptics have harmed the world much. And so, yeah, I mean, a time of decadence is a sort of a scary time or a difficult time, but it is also the chance to create something new, the chance to get better, the chance to say maybe take the best from our ancestors, the best from that 60s spirit of rebellion, along with a sober acceptance of the failures of the 60s, and how engaged the establishment is in our lives, in order to do better next time. I think that's all you can ask for. Just try to do better next time. So on that note, I think I'll wrap up. I went a little longer than I expected. So if you're listening to this via a podcatcher, then you might not know about my YouTube channel, The Philosopher. I stream these episodes on my YouTube channel before I upload them to the podcast feed. The schedule I think I've set for myself is, which I didn't accomplish this week, but if possible, I'd like to record, say on Friday nights, and have the podcast feeds uploaded by Sunday. Sometime on Sunday, say Sunday night. Today I'm recording on Sunday, and I'll have to try to scramble to get it uploaded tomorrow. It might not. It might be uploaded a day or so after. But that's hopefully the schedule I'll try to keep. You can also check out my other podcast, the one I co-host, Beyond Talking Points, to hear myself and my friend, who's also named is Matthew, talk back and forth about various issues. He and I disagree on practically everything, so that's always fun. So yeah, thank you for watching. Thank you for listening, and take care.